Welcome to Remix EQ Live, amplifying equity with a mix of information, interviews, and inspiration. I'm your host, Dr. Erika Tate, and today I am live from Savannah, Georgia, where I live. For those who are joining us today, please drop a greeting of choice in the comments. Let me know where you're joining from and the equity work that you do or aspire to do. And while you are dropping your info in the comment, I want to preview today's show. As you can tell, it's a solo or host only show today. And that's because the learning designer in me recognized that video has the potential to overload or overwhelm. And this is in general because of the sights and sounds and meaning making and that is being conveyed at the same time. But this is also especially true when there are amazing humans in dialogue, dropping knowledge, dropping inspiration at regular intervals over a course of a very fast-paced 30-minute show. Like my guest here on a Remix EQ Live, for those who are just joining us. So in today's show, I want to offer you some context and framing that I hope will help you process the information and inspiration that you see, hear, and feel on the show. And more importantly, help you find purpose for it in your life, whether it's professional or personal. And of course, you can apply what you learn on today's show to any experience where you are connecting with a person who is sharing information about what they do, their motivations and why they do it, and their expectations for the outcomes or impact of their work. These types of learning experiences can happen during networking events, panels, video or audio events like today, podcasts while you're driving down the road, or regular old or random conversations with strangers, which I miss, but I know are coming back. When I'm coaching teachers or school leaders, or I'm mentoring early professionals, I take my role very seriously, and I approach it in two ways. One, I try to use the current or most recent situation as a way to exemplify any of the recommendations that I'm sharing with them. And two, I also try to share tools like routines or frames that they can adapt, apply, or transfer to other situations or contexts. I feel that this is a more empowering approach to learning and really positions the learner for future successful learning experiences. So by the end of today's show, I hope that you will add a few more tools for processing information and inspiration that you receive from amazing people in your daily life. So for those who have just joined us, this is a Remix EQ Live. And this show offers us the opportunity to connect and build community around the equity work that is being performed throughout the world. And we do this by centering the work. That is, our guests, and today me, share examples of what they do in their role or position as a way to illustrate how they are advancing equity in the spaces in which they work and live. So, to center the work, I want to share an example with you. A few months ago, I participated in a panel discussion that focused on equity in classrooms and schools. The moderator posed a question that I absolutely fell in love with. And the question was, what does equity look like in a classroom on a Monday? It really spoke to the day-to-day happenings and interactions that serve as indicators for whether or not students are engaged in equitable learning experiences. So to respond to this question, I thought and shared a bit about my instructional coaching experience, and part of that experience is visiting classrooms. So when I visit a classroom, my focus is on students first and teachers next. That is, I have a set of look fors, listen tos, and feels to get a sense of how students are participating and achieving in their learning community. And then I ask, what is the teacher doing to support this learning experience? Right. So I want to provide a few examples to illustrate this. So in terms of a look for, when we think about it, and let's think about it in terms of participation. When I'm thinking about how students are participating in their learning community, I'm not just looking at who's present, like who came to class that day, but also how are students showing up during these learning experiences. And are they simply like taking information in from the teacher during class? Or are they engaged in learning experiences that provide opportunities for them to share what they know with each other, even if that knowledge is just at the start or is emerging? And are they sharing that information with other students or just simply the teacher? Because in a classroom where equity is at the center, the teacher and the administrators that support the teacher believe that every student is a valuable member of their community because of their lived experiences, whether they're past or current, or they're in or outside of school. And the culture of the classroom must support students to share as they learn, not just to see if they understand or to determine if they've mastered the standard or are making progress toward the learning objective. But it's because students growing knowledge and developing skill sets are resources for their further learning for themselves and their peers. So that's my look fors. And when I'm listening to, or what I'm listening to, and I'll talk about this in terms of achievement. So when I'm speaking about achievement, I'm usually focused on the expectations that are set in the classroom and the level of thinking that students are engaged in. So as I walk around class, I'm eavesdropping on discussions that students are having with each other, with the teacher, right? I'm ear hustling, trying to see what I can learn. I'm also listening for students' comments about what they are doing. Like, this is too easy. Oh, this is too hard. Or does this even matter? Because it gives me a sense of what's being asked of them, if they're being supported to stretch beyond what they already can do. And more importantly, if they believe that their teacher believes that they can achieve. Um, so, in a classroom where teachers are striving for instructional equity, I hear the teacher consistently communicating their expectations for student learning, whether they're describing the standard or learning objective, or more importantly, when they're offering personalized feedback to a student to make sure that they're progressing toward the learning objective with the supports that they need to be successful. I also hone in on the questions that are being posed by the teacher. These are really great indicators to me about what levels of thinking that students are engaged in. So, of course, we always want to make sure that students comprehend key information about a topic. But if the questions stay at that level, then it gives me pause. Because the reason we want to ensure that students comprehend what they're listening to, what they're watching, what they're seeing, what they're reading, is because we want to move them toward those higher levels of thinking where they are putting to use their knowledge and skills and real world experiences. And for those of you who are social justice oriented educators or learning designers like me, you also want to ensure that students are being pushed to develop the critical consciousness to understand their world. So, what has happened and what is happening. And we want them to have as much practice as possible, building this critical understanding, synthesizing different information and media about people, events, ideas, and that they feel supported and encouraged to generate solutions that make our world a more just place. So when I'm in a classroom and I am trying to see what equity looks like on a given day, right? I am looking for certain things. I am listening to teachers and students as indicators of expectations and thinking. But I'm also trying to get a feel of the room. And I talk about this because sometimes when we're thinking about any type of data collection through observations, interviews, asking questions, we sometimes try to detach emotion from that. But as I've talked about many times before, is that in this equity work that we do, it is very much emotional. It's emotional for the people who do not have access to the resources that they need to thrive. It's emotional for the people who are doing the work to ensure that that happens, especially for those who are part of the communities in which they're trying to help achieve those equitable outcomes. And so it's important that we don't try to think about detaching emotion for our work from our work, but how emotion helps us and facilitates the work that we're doing with the communities that we're serving. So for this part, I wanted to share an example of a class that I saw a couple years ago. It's a kindergarten class in North Georgia, and was one of the most amazing kindergarten teachers. I was like, hey, you are going to be my children's virtual kindergarten teacher before we went virtual. And what was great about this class is I visited a couple times, but I had the opportunity on my last visit to attend a learning celebration, which is awesome, which is really when students have that culminating experience where they can share what they have done and what they have learned. And so I walked into the media space to see what was the final result, of these students who have been working on this project. So for a couple of months, these kindergartners were asked to research either a animal or a historical figure, and they needed to understand about them. They needed to write at least 100 words as a nonfiction or informational narrative. And if you have visited any kindergarten class, you know that it is a range of learners because of the diverse experiences that have happened before they came into school. And so to get students to that point where they're all doing what is rigorous for kindergartners, really writing this story is a great feat, and feeling that they're supported to do this. And so they wrote the story because they were authors. They illustrated their report because they were illustrators, and that's how they introduced themselves. And then they had the opportunity to read the story and record it so that others could listen. And so on that day in the media center, I'm walking in and students are everywhere. They're dressed in costume, like as bearded dragons, as just different people in history. And you go up and you talk with them, you listen to their story, and they know that you are expected to ask them questions about what they've done and why they studied it and what they've learned from this experience. And you can just feel the energy, right? It's high energy. Everybody's excited. Everybody's full of joy because they're talking about something that really matters to them because they generated this knowledge that they're going to share. And they're just super excited. And so I'm like on a high, like, yes, this is going great. I just love all the different ways that they're sharing their knowledge. And so at the end of this experience, students are called up one by one to celebrate their achievement with a certificate. And as they bring up their report, which is bounded, they hand it to the librarian who scans their barcode and adds their book to the shelf of the library so that other students can check out their work. And there was this waiting list of all the children's siblings, older siblings, because they wanted to be the first to check out their younger siblings' book and share it with their parents. And I just thought that when I think about a feeling, there was so much pride in that room about what they did, because not only did they accomplish something, but they share their accomplishment with others. And so that is like a sense of like what type of feeling I look for when I'm in classrooms, because I just believe that learning is joy, and I want to feel that. And when we put the expectations in place and the supports and structures to help students achieve, we can ensure that all learners experience that joy. So these are a couple of ways that I make sense of information during learning experiences. And so I know that not everybody is in classrooms and watching these experiences, but you are probably either facilitating a learning experience in which you're taking observations, or you are part of a learning experience. And so it's really important that we think about in terms of what should I look for to determine if this experience is equitable, if it's meeting my needs or meeting the needs of others. What should I listen to during that? And what should I be feeling? So I'm going to continue forward, and I want to talk a little bit more about how we might put this in place as you are watching Remix EQ Live. Oh, but first I'm going to say, hi, David Sneed. Woo! I'm glad you could join us. Stay tuned for more. All right. And as we're going through, please feel free to drop in any comments, any questions as we're moving through. I'm excited to be in real time with you guys and to really interact. I think we're always learning together. So, most recently, I've had this opportunity to facilitate workshops with early educators and families who have small children, like myself, about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And I very much believe in my soul that STEM offers a way to understand the natural and built world and its interactions. And I think that this is very much in line with how children grow and develop and make sense of the world. So when I do these sessions, I always show two slides, and I want to share those with you and talk a little bit about them. So, a couple of years ago, I attended a learning sciences conference and I participated in a day long workshop about this very awesome National Science Foundation funded science education collaborative called Learning in Places. Dr. Megan Bain is the principal investigator, and along with her team, they have really pushed the field in thinking about what it means to advance equity when teaching science, but also what it means to do that when studying how science is learned through different equity lenses. In particular, recognizing that students or learners of any age have expansive or diverse ways of making sense of information because of who they are, where they live, whose family or culture that they are a part of. And she also emphasizes the importance and influence of place. And for those who perform equity work, we know that where communities are located and how we locate ourselves in these communities is critical to the work that we do. And so in this workshop, she talked about two things. Talked about wonder in two ways. So, one, she defined wonder as the beginning or start of a question. And I had not yet heard it articulated that way, but it definitely made sense once she said it. So, wonder is the beginning or start of a question. And sometimes we find it very difficult to figure out what's the question that we're going to ask the person that we're talking to so that we can better understand what they're talking about or figure out how we can connect it to what we're doing. But if we give ourselves permission to wonder, then we might find questions or a set of questions that are key to changing how we understand our world and what we can do in it. And the other way she talked about wonder was she asked, who gets to wonder? So this quote is from their work. Sparking curiosity, wondering opens up opportunities for learners to engage in speculative thinking about possible relationships and draws their attention to the unknown. So, being curious, wondering, and beginning to ask questions about your world allows for you to imagine what is possible and begin to make connections that have not yet been made. Right? So, it makes us ask the question or consider what opportunities are we providing children at an early age to engage in these wonder filled experiences? And because of what we believe about certain children or certain communities, are some children doing what they're told and others wondering what the world holds for them? So, wonder-filled experiences aren't just for children. When talking with early educators and parents, I remind them that they too are wondering alongside their children and that they should absolutely wonder aloud so that their children know what wondering is and what it can do. No, we are professionals who are learning. So, professional learning can also be a wonder filled experience. So, next, I want to talk a bit about or walk through an example of how you might wonder while engaging with a Remix EQ Live guest. And so, to illustrate this, I'm going to refer to the most recent Remix EQ Live episode, which was featured. It was an interview show, and it featured Dr. Kathy Anderson and nurse practitioner and a researcher Kathleen Mayon. And so I definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. But you don't need to have watched it to walk through this example with me. And so when you're thinking about guests, when you're watching people who are telling you about what they do, why they do it, how they do it, I want us to look for a few things. So we'll start there. So one is just look at them, right? So I'm going to be very concrete and straight up. Look at them, but listen to how they identify themselves. So no assumptions, but wonder how their identity and their lived experiences have shaped their career pathways or their personal pathways. The other thing is to look at the pattern or shape of their career pathway. Kathleen Mayon, right? She's a nurse practitioner and researcher. She described her pathway as having twists and turns. So as you listen to her or other guests, wonder what happened right before that twist or turn, or wonder how can you pivot, twist, or switch directions in your current career path. Dr. Kathy Anderson talked about her career as a set of different roles. So she's a clinical physician who's seeing patients. She's an advocate for tribal communities to make sure that they have access to the healthcare that is their right. She's a diversity, equity, and inclusion champion, because that's the only way I can say that word, for the American Academy of Pediatrics. So when listening to her or guests like her, you may wonder, how does one manage all those different roles in their career? Or you might wonder, what additional roles or strategic roles can you take on in or outside of your community as you define it to be better positioned to advance equity? All right. So these are things to look for when guests are sharing their story. Next, listen for, all right? So I want you to listen to like the day-to-day responsibilities. Remix EQ Live showcases the equity work that people are performing. And it is in the details of this work that gives us examples of the different roles, approaches, strategies, and tools. So when Kathleen Mayon was speaking about her work and how she currently has a role as a data researcher, she said, yes, so now I look at the data for every oncology patient. So first I was like, I'm gonna tell you what I wondered. I was like, when are we gonna get her back on the show? Because basically saying that is a tease for all those data heads out there. Like, you have what data? I need to know more. And you, like me, may also have wondered, how many rows are in that spreadsheet? And more importantly, what systems does she and her team have in place to manage and analyze and communicate about this very important data so that it leads to equitable outcomes? And in her case, more diversity in oncology clinical trials and studies. So when listening to guests, you might also wonder, which skills or experiences do we share and how are we using them the same or differently? And how might I apply some of these skills to new projects or within new organizations that are seeking equitable outcomes in different communities? And then finally, feel. And I want you to think about this in two ways. So when you're watching the Remix EQ Live guests and they are sharing their amazing stories, they are dropping knowledge, they are dropping inspiration, I want you to note the emotions that they are expressing as they talk about the work that they do. But I also want for you to note how you feel when you hear them share their story. So Kathleen Mignon talked about her early experience with a diversity and inclusion committee at her job. And she mentioned that when few people express interest, she found it hurtful. And at the end of the show, Dr. Kathy Anderson charged us to draw on our lived experiences, including the passion and trauma, to continue moving the needle forward and advancing equity in communities. So when listening to guests, you may wonder if they mirror feelings you have or have had in the past. And you may also wonder about your current work. Are you passionate about it? Does it bring you joy that is palpable to others? And as I would say, does it make you happy in your soul? So I know that to consider the look fors, the listen tos, the feels, and to note your wonderings for each of these is one way out of many to make sense of the information and inspiration shared by amazing people. But I hope that you find this framing useful in your day-to-day, which is made up of very structured learning experiences and sometimes learning experiences that are very spontaneous. And we want to use these experiences to not only build our knowledge and skill set, but also to help us identify our purpose and our place in the world. So I encourage you to continue to tune in to Remix EQ Live because we have many, many more exciting shows ahead. Our next show is March 11th. It will be an interview show focused on advocacy. And I love it because I'm shouting out some locals in Savannah. I'm excited for them to join the show. We'll have Alicia Johnson, who is the executive director of a Step Up Savannah, which is awesome anti-poverty nonprofit here in Savannah, Georgia, and Andrea Mims, who's a lawyer, mediator, advocate, and most recently, public defender. So I'm excited to remix them on our show so that they can share with you the work that they're doing, why they're doing it, and what impact that they want it to have on the communities that they serve, which also happens to be the community in which I live. So be sure to watch your feed, check your inbox so that you have the details to tune in next month. And also, anytime you in between, I would love for you guys to visit the Remix EQ Live website. I'm posting past episodes there and also information for upcoming shows. And of course, while you are there, feel free to poke around my website to learn more about my business, Blue Knowledge, which advances equity in schools and communities. So thank you guys so much for your engagement and your intention and your support in this effort. I look forward to connecting with you again for another show. I'm your host, Dr. Erika Tate, and this is Remix EQ Live. See you next time.